Well, welcome everyone. My name is Eileen Harris. I'm the Executive Director for the Alabama Center for Dispute Resolution, and we're so grateful that you're able to join us today for our webinar. The Alabama Center for Dispute Resolution is pleased to co-sponsor, along with the dispute resolution section of the Alabama State Bar, today's program on cybersecurity. And before I introduce today's speakers, I would like to cover just a few housekeeping rules. We've got everyone muted. That will help ensure that we have a great presentation without any interruptions or distractions. So I'm going to ask you please to mute your microphone or your phone. And I think this will help us ensure that we have a really good, pleasant 1-hour webinar. We do have a chat box available. If you have any questions or comments during the program, you can enter them in the chat box to everyone. We will try to address those as we go through the program, or you can save them towards the end of the webinar. If you're seeking continuing legal education credit with the Alabama State Bar, we'd appreciate you completing the evaluation. As you entered the meeting, you saw that there was a link to SurveyMonkey. We'll send that out to you as well later. And we'll also put it back in the chat box if you missed that, but you can copy and paste that and complete the program evaluation. That is for CLE credit with the Alabama State Bar. We'll also be providing you with a code at the conclusion of the webinar to enter into the evaluation. And if you have any questions, just give us a holler about that. We're going to ask you to try to complete your evaluations a week from now. And once those are completed, then we'll post your CLE credits shortly thereafter. And so again, welcome to our webinar. This is an important topic, especially with everything that's been going on in the news, the media about cybersecurity. I can't think of two better people to talk with you about this. I participated in this webinar probably about 2 weeks ago and just said this really could be helpful to our lawyers and to our mediators to be aware of cybersecurity threats. And so having said all that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists, Elizabeth Carter and Will Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Let me say in advance, this is my first webinar, so apologies in advance for all the mistakes. I hope everybody is well. I don't have much to say because we have Will Taylor has been gracious enough to agree to speak to us today, and he is definitely the expert. What I would encourage everyone to do is to really listen up. I got involved in the cybersecurity world years ago because my firm started doing a lot more healthcare work that required that. And I tell the tale that I went to the cybersecurity conference for ABA in 2018 and literally came back to my firm and was like, shut everything down, shut everything down. I didn't even know what the dark web was. It has advanced tremendously since then. And what we have started seeing happening are risk assessments that are happening, or companies that we want to work with that are demanding and requiring a very, very high level security that is not always conducive to our practices. I think it's what we don't know that's the scariest. And so working with people like Will has saved us. It has been worth every bit of it. We don't have Ben Farah with us here today. When we did this talk last time, he told the story of a good friend of his who got hacked, and that was a lawyer, and what happened and the crisis it put him through. And I know that just this week, tech groups were working all over helping law firms get back up to speed. If you had Exchange server, if your mail came through a server that was on your premises and you were not in the cloud. So I'm going to turn it over to Will. When we talked about this before, I jumped in some, but I don't want to be distracting today since we're on the computer. But if you guys have questions, I'm going to kind of monitor that for him. Or if anybody, if I don't get a chance to say this again, if anybody wants to reach out to me about policies or things that our firm did to kind of get in front of this or to stay on top of it, because nobody ever gets in front of it, to try to chase behind it, I should say, I'm always happy to talk to anybody and share information. So with that, Will, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Liz. Thank y'all for having me today. My name is Will Taylor. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I've been working in the IT industry for almost 22 years. I grew up around it. My father was a programmer in the late 70s, early 80s, became a systems analyst. I grew up always with a computer in the house, all the way back to the DOS days. It's kind of a family tradition. My dad was in the line of work. My brother is in the same line of work. The path I took to get here was kind of a winding one. I spent about 15 years in what's called holistic MSP consulting, where I've worked in infrastructure, I've worked with on networking, I kind of had to do everything. And the approach with the firm that I worked with was not what's the problem and we can fix it, but we can fix it, what's the problem. So I've been about the last 8 years really focused in on cybersecurity. I spend this all day, every day, working in this. I've been working from home for almost 2 years, so I'm almost as comfortable in a webinar as I am in person now, which is probably not the healthiest thing on earth. But I really kind of want today just kind of go over not only what's happening now, but where things are going, the direction that cybersecurity is going. It's always changing. It seems to dominate the news. The news cycle when it comes to cybersecurity is that is bad news sells, but there has been a lot of bad news lately, especially with everyone kind of migrating from working in offices behind a firewall to working from home. It's presented a lot of challenges, as I'm sure a lot of you have discovered and dealt with yourselves, but it's also led to a lot of opportunities for the bad guys. And it's, as you're going to see during this presentation, this business is booming for the bad guys. And what we're going to talk about today is not just the bad news. Also kind of want to talk about things that organizations can do to help protect themselves and their data. So with that, I'm just going to kind of jump in to the presentation. I like to ask people when I'm dealing with clients on site and when I'm trying to get them to think about the value of the sensitive data that they have is what's the most valuable thing in your office? A lot of people will say it's the building itself, it's the real estate, it's the furniture, whatever it may be, the computers themselves. But the most valuable thing in your office is the data that you own, that you host, or that you transmit. And it may not be that you own it, but that you're holding it, that you're hosting it, that you're storing it, or that you're transmitting it. And what I try to get clients to think about, what I try to get businesses to think about is what's the most secure that you could get your data, and what's the most secure posture you could attain with your data and still have it be financially feasible. So kind of regardless of what line of work you're in, and especially with the line of work that you're all in the legal industry, if you will stop and think, how much sensitive data do we have? How much PII, how many people's phone numbers and email addresses and addresses and date of birth? How much PCI data do we have? How much financial data do we have? How much HIPAA data do we have? And when we talk about the value of these things, we have to think almost like a bad guy would. So if you go on the dark web, not to terrify you any further, Liz, but if you go on the dark web, PCI records, payment card information records are selling for $5.40 a piece. So if your credit card was compromised and somebody got all of your credit card information or your debit card information, that could be sold in a batch where each PCI sensitive data, payment card information data, is sold for $5.40 a piece. If you go on the dark web and you find where someone is selling HIPAA data, where someone's selling medical data combined with their PII, so not only their medical data, but also their name, their date of birth, their street address, and combined with all that, those are selling for $254 a piece. And those numbers are pretty current. So what we're starting to see is there's different value numbers attached to different kinds of data. And when we think about those, we need to think in those terms as well. What's the worst case scenario? What would a bad guy pay for the data that we're hosting? And where that should kind of lead us is, do we actually know as a company where we are storing, or where we are transmitting sensitive data? I find that a lot of clients I work with, they don't know the answer to that question. They think they know the answer to that question. And then when we kind of go in and evaluate a network, when we kind of go in and evaluate servers and PCs and email, we find that there's a plan, but it's not being instituted. They don't know where the sensitive data that they are hosting or transmitting is actually going from and where it's hosted. So I want to kind of go over, when we talk about all these different kinds of sensitive data, it's expanded. It used to be your PII and your HIPAA data and your PCI. Those were the big three. But what's happened over time is they've expanded specifically PII to include a lot of things that you wouldn't think are sensitive data. For instance, you all know that social security numbers, that your name and your email, all of that's covered. But from a technology standpoint, your personal IP address at home. So if you're at home and you're connected to WOW or Charter or whomever, your house, your router in your home has a public IP address, and that is considered sensitive data now. From a healthcare, it's not only your medical history, but things like your blood type, your disabilities, pregnancy status. PII now includes employment data like your employee ID, job title, department, that kind of thing. The reason that those are important is not that those things are maybe necessarily private or protected in and of themselves, but what we're finding a lot of times is that if threat actors can get a combination of your name, your street address, and your employee ID, then they can efficiently and effectively become you when they're trying to do things like phishing scams, or when they're doing things like impersonation, when they're doing social engineering. So it's not always just that the sensitive data is the big three that we think of. It's a combination of lots of different kinds of data that can be used and leveraged by threat actors to have negative impact on your business, and to mislead people in your business to thinking that they're talking to someone that they're not. So what's happening in 2021? So what you can see here is a chart from 2015 to 2021. And the answer is more of everything: more threat actors, more opportunities. The average US ransomware request, I guess we will call it a request from threat actors, is $84,000 per incident. So it doesn't matter how big your business or how small your business is. It doesn't matter if you've only got 10 employees, but you've got 4 terabytes worth of data. They don't care. The ransom notes, the most recent ransom note that I read as a part of a breach response for a company that contacted me was, we don't care how big or how small your company is, this is the ransom. It's very straightforward. Once they send you that ransom note, to some degree it's too late, because what started to happen, it used to be that people would call us, or we would come into someone's office and all of their data would be encrypted. So files that they had on their desktop would have the same beginning name, but there'd be a bunch of gibberish at the end of it, and their files had been encrypted. And if you wanted them to decrypt your files, then you'd have to pay. But the reason that you're seeing such a jump in this is not only because more and more threat actors are out there, but because they've started to take a two-pronged approach. So threat actors now aren't just encrypting your data and holding you ransom. If you don't pay the ransom, they'll exfiltrate the data and publish it on the internet. So we've actually seen this where if threat actors have the ability to penetrate your network, whether that's through email or you not having your firewall configured correctly or through a third party, they won't only encrypt your data and not give it back until you pay, but if you don't pay, they will publish it on the dark web. They'll publish or sell it on the dark web. We've actually seen this happen to an education entity that called us for a breach response, wherein they were told, you're being held for ransom. They looked at their backups. We looked at their backups, and they had backups of all their data. And when they didn't reply to the original ransom demand because they were just going to restore and start over, the threat actor sent them another email that said, if you don't pay the ransom, you may restore from backups, but all of the sensitive data that we got off your network is going to be published on the web. So you can see here that the numbers are going up. The first ransomware event that I was ever called in to help with was in 2009. And I think the request or the ransom demand was the equivalent of $2,500. And for an organization of the same size in 2020, the ransom demand was $128,000. In 2009, I had to drive to Birmingham, Alabama, and put 700 some odd dollars into a Bitcoin ATM and help a client out. That's what they wanted to do. But nowadays, the numbers are going up, as you can see here.
I'm just going to jump in here and say that I know a recent law firm, which of course has special consideration for us because we don't really have a choice. We have an ethical obligation, and so we are completely at their mercy. They shut down your functionality. They have your data, and I think it was about, and this was a very, very, very small operation, was about $270,000,
Yes.
and they had to pay it. They did not have a choice.
Yes. Yeah, they're actually starting to put that in the initial communication they send you, that they don't care about your business or anything else. All they want is the financial benefit for what they've done. The threat actors now, the difference between now and even 2 or 3 years ago is this is an actual industry. This is an actual multi-billion-dollar industry where the people who are crafting and publishing and selling the software that's used for security breaches actually has help desks set up where if you go on the dark web and you buy their software, they send you a phone number and an email. And if you have problems getting that malicious software to work, you can call a help desk or email a help desk for assistance. So some of the biggest breaches of the last year, maybe that you didn't hear about, and these are larger than your average law firm, but some of the ones that happened in 2020 that maybe you didn't hear about but exposed a lot of people's data. The first one is Whisper, which is ironically a secret sharing app where people can go onto this app and basically write a journal and publish it anonymously and tell their most intimate thoughts or secrets. They were hacked in 2020 and exposed around 350 million people's personal information, as well as their stories. Broad Voice is an ISP, an internet service provider that was hacked. That case had 440 million people's PII. So phone number, address, full name, date of birth. Estee Lauder Company, which probably more of you have heard of than Whisper or Broad Voice put together, had a test database network that they established, and it was hacked, and it exposed 600 million of their customers' records. So some of that was PCI, some of that was payment method, some of that was just PII. KeepNet Labs, ironically, the one in the bottom left, is a security company that specializes in documenting and analyzing forensics for companies that have been breached. And in a very ironic twist, they were breached in 2020 and 800 million records were exposed, including data about other companies that had been breached and what all was exposed. So that one was one of the worst. But the one that you've probably all heard of, and I'm going to cover this a little bit in depth because it has practical applications for all of us, is the Microsoft and the I completely went blank just then. It's a Microsoft breach along with rapid fire. I'm going to go over a couple of things first. Some of the breach response observations, these are more anecdotal. So I've been working breach response and providing cybersecurity posture assistance for companies for 8-9 years now. And I've gone back through a lot of the breaches that I've worked. And some of the things that stick out to me is that 82% of breaches indicate that the initial intrusion vector was through email. So when we talk about how can you make your company more secure, how can you make your practice more secure, the number one way that you can do that is educating your end users. The approach that I advise my clients to take is if you've ever been on a military base in a sensitive area, anybody as a guest, anybody on that base who is active duty can stop you and ask you what you're doing and where you're going. 82% of the breaches that I've worked have come through phishing attempts and spear phishing and whaling. So really honestly, when we talk about this, it is going to be a matter of having good endpoint protection, having good data hygiene, but end user education awareness training is the cheapest and the most effective thing you can do to make your
And I'm gonna jump in here again. So what we've been seeing a lot is that one of the main questions we get asked from clients is, do we segment out like our employees? Do we designate who has to have access to sensitive data to do their jobs? You just can't let everybody have access. You have to protect who's getting it. And are we educating everybody? And I just want to underscore that's a very inexpensive tool to get. We have used a couple different ones. I love the one we're using now, but the bottom line is not only do they do little tutorials, they occasionally send out test phishing emails. And if somebody clicks on it, it automatically lets you know so you can talk to them or whatever, but it also sends them a little tutorial where they have to relearn about that, and you can document all that. And if anything ever bad does happen, it impacts you greatly in a positive way to be able to demonstrate that you've done that. And if you get cyber insurance, which I so highly recommend getting cyber insurance, they typically require it. So I just think that for law firms, it's not an expensive thing at all to do. Which we hardly ever get to say, and that it makes a huge difference. And we've done it for long enough now that I bet it's been over a year since I've gotten a report that somebody on one of our teams clicked on something they shouldn't have. And I'm not going to tell you how many clicks we had when we first started testing them because people don't know. So it works. The educational tool works. Okay, sorry.
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you. That's very true. And it's not just making your employees sit through. My advice is always don't make your employees sit through a 3-hour, absolute coma inducing thing once a year. Security awareness training needs to be an ongoing thing. It needs to be a part of, breaking it into semesters or quarters or whatever you want to do. But end user awareness training is one of the most effective ways specifically for things like phishing, and what's really starting to catch on now is smishing, which is SMS texting that looks like it's coming from one person, maybe in your organization, asking you for financial information or a password or whatever else it may be, because so many companies have spam filtering for their email or they have phishing protection enabled now. We're starting to see the threat actors spread out into texting and spoofing phone numbers and identities, because so many people are working from home and because so much of the communication we have now it is over text. I'm, in my early 40s, and I probably send 300 texts a day, and I probably on a really busy day have 20 phone calls. So and 25 to 30 outbound emails. But the threat actors know this, specifically because we are doing so much remote work, that people are using back channels, that people are texting more than they are emailing. So they're starting to leverage that. So your end user awareness training about those kinds of issues can be absolutely vital. Some other things that we're starting, we've been seeing the last couple of years, ransomware infections that have been around for 8 or 10 years are being repurposed and re-leveraged. So ransomware attacks like Ryuk and some of the others that the one that hit Maersk Container Services for something like $34 billion in damages is starting to come back, and they have different attack methodologies. And that's because a lot of these threat actors are starting to set up shop as a business and offer their services to other threat actors. Reporting requirements are starting to become more uniform from state to state, starting with California with the Consumer Information Protection Act, the CCPA, and New York. Now they have consumer protection acts that are much more strenuous and much more have much higher requirements for reporting of any kind of potential breach, and they require a lot more work from the entities that host or transmit data for people living in that state. So I work with a lot of companies that are under the FFIEC, they're financial institutions, and a lot of credit unions. And this is starting to creep even in Alabama, for little local banks and credit unions. If they have members or clients of their bank or their credit union that are based in New York and California, they have to be mindful of these things. Same for a legal firm. If you have clients that are living in California or in New York or some of these other states that are starting to put out more strenuous requirements, then the burden is on you to know that. And a lot of legal firms do not know that and not aware of it. Again, threat actors are starting to include a threat to publish sensitive data along with the threat of data loss itself. And we are seeing ever increasing levels of sophistication, ability, and coordination among threat actors. It used to be that a lot of these threat actors were independent, one person, small operations. There's a lot of nation states that have gotten involved. Now on to the biggest hack that you've probably heard a lot about, and maybe you don't understand half of what you're hearing. It's the security breach for SolarWinds and Microsoft. So I'll briefly explain what SolarWinds was, and then I want to show you how long this was going on. SolarWinds is a third-party provider. They provide oversight and management tools for large operations that have hundreds or thousands of servers and computers and routers and switches in their environment. And they provide what's called one-to-many management. It's a tool where you can essentially control hundreds and thousands of servers, computers, routers, and switches from one pane of glass. You can push out policy, you can push out procedures, you can push out patching, a lot of things that we used to have to do manually. SolarWinds and some other companies like them made it possible for administrators and IT people to leverage these tools to do one-to-many management. So one person can manage 100 times more than they used to be able to. And Microsoft, you may have heard of, is a small company out of California that we're all in bed with, right? What happened was Microsoft was using SolarWinds products in their environments, at their on-premise environments for their routers and switches and servers and computers, as well as in their cloud, which is called Microsoft Azure. And when SolarWinds got hacked, that gave the threat actors, and the common knowledge is that this was a nation state. This was either North Korea or more than likely Russia. That gave them access into Microsoft, which I can't really see the chat room right now, but if you're using Microsoft 365 for your email, or if you're using Microsoft Teams, or you're using Microsoft Azure, what this means is, because Microsoft was exposed by a third party, there's still a lot of debate about whether or not our data in Microsoft's cloud, whether that's your email or if you've got servers in their cloud, if your data and my data was exposed, which is particularly troublesome if you're transmitting sensitive data over your email or keeping that in a server on Azure. So here's the timeline, just to give you an idea of how patient some of these attacks are. In September of 2019, the threat actors accessed SolarWinds, and the way they did it, and this is not a joke, was somebody on a lower level team at SolarWinds had published a web server where they kept all of their updates, and the password was SolarWinds123 exclamation point. And this was kind of the jumping off point for the bad guys. And what I really want to see, I don't want to go through all the techno babble here. What I really want you to see is that over months and months and months, all the way up to a year later, threat actors were in these networks. They were poisoning the well, so to speak, and they were able to access something like 18,000 different companies' networks, sensitive data, their servers, and their PCs. So this is a much bigger case than most of the ones that I deal with. Obviously, there are whole factions of our government that are involved in trying to figure out what happened here, and a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me. But you can see at the end here, we're going on a year and a half. They're still trying to piece together what all was taken, what all was accessed, and how many people have been impacted. And here's a small heat map. I hope you can see this at home where you're watching. This shows all of the different locations across the world where threat actors were able to access people's networks, data, and potentially sensitive data and email. So you can see these bright orange spots are the Microsoft data centers in the United States. And then a lot of the purple are end users where they're pretty sure there was some kind of access given to the threat actors during this. So this became a worldwide, absolutely universal threat to pretty much anyone who uses Microsoft, which again, is basically a legal monopoly. We're all using Microsoft for something. So what I want to go through next, Liz, I want to make sure you didn't want to jump in. I want to give you a chance if you wanted to say anything there.
No, I mean, I think what I would say about that is that I didn't know what SolarWinds was until I started getting emails from clients that had what they call security alert risk assessment questionnaires, where we were immediately required to answer questions about our exposure, what it impacted, certain tools we used, what we did for remediation, containment. And that's how I learned about what SolarWinds was. And so from a legal perspective, when there's all these, or practicing law, I should say, when there's all these companies or things that you're hearing about or people are talking about, and you think, oh, it doesn't matter, it's what's been going on, it is connected to our practice because of the way we hold our data or the vendors that we use, which is why it is so critical to have risk assessments or security policies and work with security experts to make sure that I was able to call obviously and say, I need assistance in answering these questions. And I thought it was over. We got one this morning. I answered one about an hour before I got on this webinar, and it had to do with, I guess, the second layer fallout, which is where it shut down the, exchangers. Our email exchanges are not on a server on our own property, which apparently that's where the big impact was. Although the whole part that we're not actually sure what's going to happen because our servers are in Azure. I will share that. Especially for our healthcare practice. And so that's what I would reiterate. And that, what is it? It's not if you're going to get hacked, but when it's going to happen. And so you just have to plan for it to happen so that you can answer those questions and kind of understand what's going on. Because when I got stuff like that 3 years ago, it would freak us out. It still does, but it's not as brutal. So that's what I would say in regards to its relation to practicing law, that it is just super critical to understand. I was looking to see if we had a question here. Looks like we have a question. Can you comment on the use of DuckDuckGo, Onion, Thor, etc. as a protection product?
DuckDuckGo, I don't have a lot of experience with. And what were the other ones? I'm sorry.
It was DuckDuckGo, Onion, Thor, etc.
So Thor VPN, I do have experience with, and it sounds like someone's trying to maybe piece together some different tools to use to protect themselves. Thor is an anonymizer VPN. I use Thor myself because I do work from home. I have 2 different internet circuits coming into my home. One I use for personal use. I have, Hulu and Netflix, and my kids each have a tablet or a phone, depending on their behavior. And the other one I use for when I'm doing penetration testing. So there are a lot of really good tools out there, third-party tools like those. Onion, I haven't used as well. My only experience with Onion has been during the decryption process. There are a lot of things you can do individually. If you're working for a larger practice or a collective of people, I should say, organization, I would recommend that you come up with something more universal than having your end users go and try to piece together things on their own, up to and including a holistic endpoint protection that uses AI. I'm going to talk about that in a little while. VPN for end users, and it's all well and good to have a VPN coming back to a firewall at your office. But as a part of your risk assessment, if you're having risk assessments done, yes,
Anybody on here that I'm offending, I'm sorry, but I can tell you, I didn't even know what VPN was. So
okay,
let's give that in context. So VPN is if you're somewhere else and you're remoting into your data, that it is a way that through the time it's protected, that sends you, there's different ones. We use Duo Mobile. We used to use one that sent us a code that entered, but it's basically creates another password outside of your device. I know this sounds really dumbing it down. Will's probably going to roll his eyes. But for me, as a lawyer that doesn't want to have to worry about this stuff, it creates another password to get where you're going. And I think a lot more people now know what that is because we all started remoting. But a year ago, I don't know that a lot of people knew what a VPN was. So
right.
pick back up, but I was just putting in context what a VPN is for our world. And we have another question that we'll get to in a second because I think you're touching on it. It's really, this person said this is foreign to me. It's foreign to all of us. I'm telling you, I literally came back from that cybersecurity conference and started to go like do something else for a living.
Right.
Then the question is there one or more program that you could install that would handle your phone, your iPad, your laptop? If you know that there's a safety program for your home or daily personal use versus what you would use for your client or work or your work.
Right. So there are companies now that specialize in kind of providing whole platforms for security, whether that's your personal cell phone and your home computer. There are companies out there that do that. One that I've worked with a couple of different ones, and I can pull those up and provide those as suggestions where to start. One thing that we see a lot, and this may be the heart of your question, is that a lot of companies now are letting employees do what's called BYOD, bring your own device. And the question becomes, how can we let our end users put their email or OneDrive or ShareFile or whatever it is you're using professionally? How can you make sure that that data is safe if their phone is lost or stolen or compromised?
I can tell you that as of about a year ago, we don't have a client left that allows it. Any device that has any type of access to any data at our firm has to be owned and controlled under the security policies. That it creeped up that it was getting more and more strict, and now it's just a no tolerance policy. If you've got a phone at work, it can't. I mean, if you've got something at work, it has to be, like a laptop or whatever. It's gotta be controlled by the firm. So I think for law firms, that's probably kind of a dying notion.
Yeah, and if that's not feasible or not, there's a lot of products out there now that are called MDMs, mobile device management, which is misleading because they can also protect and cover laptops, that will allow you to isolate on the device itself and segment the data that belongs to your practice and the data that belongs to the end user, so that if the person quits or if their laptop is or phone is stolen, you can wipe the whole device, or you can just wipe out the programs that have access to your firm's data. So there are companies out there that provide this kind of magic bullet where they'll help you by covering a certain number of devices in your home or your business. And then there are ways, where you can protect yourself as a business if you're doing BYOD. And for the third question, I'm actually seeing the chat now. Should you back up and save all your info, although it's totally safe when stored in this magical place? My advice is always going to be, of course, back up your device. Personally, I have an iPhone. I think it cost me $4 a month to have enough storage in iCloud to back up my phone once a month. All of that is encrypted. All of that requires kind of what Liz was talking about earlier, multi-factor authentication, where if you tried to access that, then you would have to have my device in your hand. And what Liz was talking about, multi-factor authentication, is typically something you know, like a password, something you are, like your eyes or your fingerprints as another form of identification, or something you have, like a phone. So those things can really help protect your backups in the magical place in the cloud. My advice is always going to be to back up your device and back up your data, even the sensitive data, whether that's to your local PC or to the cloud.
So you've just answered a question that we got. We have one more, then we'll let you get moving because I know we're limited on time. It says, when I delete my email or text, is it really gone or no longer a security issue? For example, old text, et cetera, that may contain sensitive information.
So really that depends on a couple of things. What platform you're using. Again, I use an iPhone. And if it's Gmail, then, you're talking about from an email perspective, then your guess is as good as anyone who doesn't work at Gmail about whether or not that email is really, truly gone. On the surface, I would say, yes, that's gone. But at the same time, I've been a part of forensic investigations where we had to go and take someone's phone and image it and decrypt it and go and retrieve things from the recycle bin and from the deleted, pictures folder. Really, that's all kind of the answer is yes, they're deleted, but the answer is also if somebody wanted it or needed it bad enough and was able to have access to your platform, whatever platform you're using, then there is still a chance they could retrieve some of that data. But on the surface, the answer is yes. I hope that's not too terribly discomforting and too misleading, but it really depends on motive and motivation of how much somebody really wanted to get that data and how much access they had to your given platform. All right, I'm gonna move on if we're okay.
I think we are for now.
Okay. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the most targeted industries. This is based on a lot of different security sec data that's out there, security data that's out there, security information. There's a lot of different sources. It's important to me as an IT professional that I be able to pull from a lot of different sources. Nobody has a monopoly on information security. So these are some of the ones that I've kind of gone through and some of the trends that we were seeing the second half of 2020. The most targeted industries. Number one is always going to be government, and whether that's state or local. I spent 2.5 years as the infrastructure director for the state of Alabama, and I can tell you without a doubt that the majority of my time there was spent in protecting us because it's the biggest target for a lot of reasons. The main one being that even state and local government, but especially federal, they have absolutely massive amounts of sensitive data. Whether that's, the Department of Public Health with all the HIPAA data or revenue with all of the financial data, whatever branch of government it is, almost whatever agency on the state level it is, they always have a ton of sensitive data. And another reason they're always high on the list is that they are a high visibility target where if someone is able to breach them, then that's a huge win for the bad guys. One that I've started to see a massive uptick in attacks on is the insurance vector. And there's a lot of good reasons for this too. Again, they have a lot of really, really, really valuable data that they are receiving, hosting, and transmitting. They interface with a lot of different, a lot of other industries and individuals that are also hosting, transmitting, and receiving sensitive data. So there's been a really concerted push towards, by the threat actors, the bad actors that are out there to try to make some gains in the insurance industry. As you can imagine, they have PCI, they have health data, they have PII, they've got it all. Healthcare is always high on the list. Again, they're always going to have a lot of data. And especially during the pandemic, which was especially cruel, they became a high value target, not just because of how much data they have but also because it made the news. There was a hospital in Germany that was almost over capacity with COVID patients that somebody went in and was able to start shutting down their healthcare systems, and people died because of it. And if you're a bad guy, if you're a bad enough guy and that makes the news, that's a win. One of the other industries that we're starting to see a massive swing in just in the last 5 years is the higher education. And I will amend that since I've made this presentation, including K through 12. I work with several large metropolitan area school districts, and there's a lot of push towards them. Again, they have a lot of really sensitive and valuable data that they are hosting, receiving, and transmitting. And again, it becomes a high publicity target as well. One of the breaches that I came in and helped with in part was in the Huntsville City Schools. Y'all might have read about that. It was last year, and they essentially had to go.
Montgomery, it happened here too, a couple years ago.
Yeah, it actually happened to the city. I didn't mention this earlier, but the city of Montgomery was hit either last year or year before last.
And so was the school system.
Right. So again, it used to be for the last 2 or 3 years, I would say it was higher education. There have been several high profile college universities that were hit, but we're starting to see a lot of K through 12. Again, valuable target for a lot of reasons. And I put this one always too. In the middle here, I've got the legal industry. The reason that the legal industry is in and of itself is a valuable target is, again, there's a lot of sensitive and valuable data that they are hosting, transmitting, and receiving. But if you think about it, especially the state, local government, insurance companies, and healthcare, those are some of the biggest practices. Some of the most common practices out there. And if, again, just like SolarWinds was the way that Microsoft data was exposed, and that's where that incident started. If a threat actor can come through a law firm and get to the data that the state and local government has, or that the insurance company has and the healthcare company has, or vice versa, then what they're able to do is kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Right. And that's why there's been a huge uptick with law firms.
Yes.
Huge. Because it gets you, it's putting you all over the map when you get into a law firm's data.
Yes. So I'm gonna talk very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, about some of the attack vectors. And what I mean by attack vectors, not to be too nerdy, is how are people getting breached, right? That's really all this is. The most common cyber attacks experienced by U.S. companies, as you can see at the top, is 38% is through phishing. Phishing and spoofing are both wide-ranging and very specific kinds of attacks. So phishing attack is casting a large net. They'll do what's called a phishing campaign, and they will email everyone they can find in an email domain, and they will mix it up. It'll look like you need to reset your Amazon password, or it'll look like you need to reset your domain password. You need to call us and discuss this wire transfer. That's called phishing. Much more specifically, we're starting to see a really big surge in what's called spear phishing, which is where they target specific higher up people within an organization. It's also called whaling, where instead of just throwing out this wide net with this shotgun approach, it's much more targeted towards high value people at the company that have more than likely the most access to financial resources or sensitive data. So think CEOs, CFOs, managing partners. Network intrusion is just like it sounds. Misconfigured firewall is right up there with phishing attacks in ways that people get into network breaches, where I've been called in to help with breach response. For both of those, there's a lot you can do. For phishing, again, my main recommendation is, besides having security set up on your email to block spam, to detect phishing, to detect and block spoofing, which is faking your email address, is end user education and awareness training. For network intrusion, I would always recommend that you do vulnerability scanning and pen testing against your network firewalls to make sure that you don't have any weaknesses there. Number 3 there, inadvertent disclosure is just like it sounds. It's also called data leakage, where someone accidentally sends sensitive data to the wrong person or gives permission to the wrong person. To really help with that one, there's something called data loss prevention. It's a mix of policies and procedures and technology that's really come leaps and bounds, especially in the cloud environments. Stolen or lost devices, I mentioned this earlier, whether that's a laptop or a cell phone, your company needs to have the security mechanisms in place to wipe stolen or lost devices. And then the last one, system misconfiguration, which technically could apply to the 4 above it as well. So that's inadvertently someone misconfigures some security apparatus or sensitive data storage method that you have. I'm going to keep this very brief because I know we've only got a few minutes left and I want to leave time for questions. The number one technical security posture recommendation I make is apply what's called layer security, where you're not just depending on your firewall and you're not just depending on your spam filtering. This is something I like to post. This shows all the different layers of security. Obviously, it's not technically or financially feasible for every company, every practice, 5-user practice to apply all of these. But I do have recommendations. If your company does not have a firewall or some kind of security gateway, if everyone's just connecting directly to the internet, you are in danger. I hate to sound like James Spann because I spent so much time watching him last night and Josh Johnson, but if you are operating right now and you are in an office or your users are connecting back to your office and you don't have a firewall or security gateway, you are in grave danger. You are literally the weak link right now, and you are an easy target. I have recommendations, not just going and getting a firewall and paying someone to configure it and set it and forget it, but there's a lot of technology available now in the firewall and security gateway world that has come leaps and bounds as a response to the massive uptick we've seen in ransomware and security breach events. I believe we're going to send out this presentation. If you have, any questions about any of these, you can reach out to me. But main ones would be you need a firewall and you need a current generation firewall or next generation firewall. Advanced endpoint protection. Gone are the days where you can go, we installed antivirus, we installed free antivirus or Windows Defender. Windows Defender, unless you're paying for the Microsoft service, is absolutely useless. I don't say that to knock Microsoft. I'm on a Microsoft device myself right now, but you need advanced endpoint protection that has central management and alerting, that has a vendor supplied security operations center. That would be a third party as a part of you buying the antivirus. The vendor supplies an operations center that monitors any threats or incidents or vulnerabilities that are found on your endpoints. So the days of just putting McAfee or Symantec on your computer and hoping that does enough and that'll check any boxes you need to check, those days are over. Again, if you have any questions about any of these, I'm going through them quickly. You can always email or call me. For larger practices, I would recommend having what's called a security incident event management platform. All of the servers, every workstation, and every firewall on your network is set to, after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of data, start overriding the logs that are there. You need some way to retain those logs. A SIEM, which is what's called security incident event management, is going to retain those logs. It's going to aggregate them and give you in one pane of glass, okay, are we under attack? Has there been a security incident? It analyzes those logs and it'll give you a much clearer picture. And then the last one I'll go over, multi-factor authentication. This is what Liz talked about earlier. multi-factor authentication, the rule of thumb, all of your privileged users should have to use multi-factor authentication.
And
whenever they sign.
your privileged users are people that you've designated that have to have access to the
Right. They
Okay, go
either have access to set permissions or security reset passwords, or they have access and ownership of sensitive data. That's what a privileged user is. Privileged users should have to use multi-factor authentication regardless of where they're logging in from. So if they're sitting in Mumbai, logging into Microsoft Office 365, they should have to do a second form of authentication. Again, multi-factor authentication is something you know, like your password, combined with something you are, like your fingerprint, or something you have, like text your cell phone. So privileged users, whether they're sitting in their office in Montgomery, Alabama, or in Mumbai, should have to go through the multi-factor authentication process whenever they're logging into any company resource. Non-privileged users should have to go through that same process, which non-privileged users are your basic users, if they're logging in remotely. The best multi-factor authentication platforms now are location aware. And again, that needs to be something you know, like a password, something you have, like your phone, or a security token, or something you are, like your thumbprint or your face scan. All right, I think we're right up against it. I wanted to give a minute or two for questions. Liz, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, the only thing I would say is that it feels really overwhelming because, and you did a great job because you're easy to understand, but I mean, it feels like that you leave it and go, well, what am I supposed to do? Like there's all this stuff. The best thing we finally did as a law firm was just figured out that we didn't know what we didn't know, and invested in working with somebody that could help us implement policies and management programs that secured us and then get cyber secure. I just see it as buying insurance. And as time has gone on over the course of our practice, it has really saved a lot of time, money, and energy to do that, because one size does not fit all. You know, if you're a sole practitioner, you need to secure everything you're doing, but you don't need the same management tools.
Right.
If you're a large firm, et cetera. And so spending the time and unfortunately some money to get some advice about that, because trying to figure it out and navigate it when you're trying to practice law, to me, I mean, we were drowning. I guess I shouldn't say that, and this is being recorded, but I mean, you know, it was just a huge learning curve, and maybe we were a little bit ahead of it because we do healthcare and had to jump out ahead of it a little bit. But I just highly recommend that, and talking to your insurance folks about what it would cost to get some cyber insurance, so that if you do have something break down or something like this happen where you're hacked, that it just doesn't strangle your practice.
Yeah.
Because they bring in folks. But I'll let people ask questions, but that's what I would encourage people to do, is to just kind of accept, like, this is too much to put together. Hopefully this is an awareness of it's important, it's got to be done, but there are certainly next steps in who do we talk to, how do we get this expert advice.
Right. And I would add to, I absolutely agree, Liz. And I would add to that, there's not a person on this call or any business really, not just the legal industry, that's not investing a ton of their trust, but a little bit of their money. So, you know, as much trust as we invest in all of the wonderful tools we have that enable us to work from anywhere, that enable us to get more done, productivity, that all of those, we're investing a ton of trust. And the question is, how much thought and money are you investing in it?
Do we have any questions? Apologies for the crazy face I just made in case anybody, my teenager, who I guess saw that it was 1 o'clock, just ran in here. I thought he was about to be on camera. Apologies. I really mean, I don't know if my information on here, but I'm Liz Carter at Hill Carter in Montgomery, and I am totally open to anybody who reaches out to me. I'm not a tech person. I'm not going to be able to give you advice about what to buy or do. You need to be talking to somebody like Will about that. But if you're looking at just the policies or educating your people, I'm so happy. I don't want anybody, you know, we were, like I said, we were very overwhelmed about that. And I am more than happy to talk to anybody if you reach out to me.
Liz and Will, this is Eileen. Thank y'all so much for a great program. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind typing in the chat box your contact information, whether it's a email or
Okay.
a phone number. If people have questions after this, that they can reach out to you if you're willing to do that.
Sure.
My goodness, this was a great program. I know it was an introductory level for us, but there was a ton of information, like you said, first steps. And I think that's important to be aware of cybersecurity. And y'all have certainly covered a lot about exposing the risk and how important it is for us to have vulnerability assessments and then user training, data loss prevention. I mean, just a ton of information. And so I very much appreciate you sharing this information with us. It's a real eye opener. Again, thank you. And I invite.
I'm having a difficult time. It's not wanting to post my chat. So
If you give me your number, I'll type it in.
yeah, so my number is 334-386-4337. That's at work, or it's 334-546-0140 is my cell phone number, and anybody's welcome to reach out.
Great. I just sent that out to everyone. Wonderful presentation. Thank you again. The code for the webinar to get MCLE credit with the State Bar to enter into your evaluation is 2021 ADR. That's 2021 ADR. I've entered that in the chat box as well, along with the link to SurveyMonkey to complete the program evaluation. But we will be sending out the slides from today to all those in attendance. And again, Liz and Will, a great program. Thank you so much for your time. And as we indicated, this program is being recorded, and we hope to have it available on the center's website. We also hope to be able to share it with the Alabama State Bar with their ProLearn section. So thank y'all again. And if there are no more questions, we'll end the webinar. Thanks again, Will and Liz. Thanks everyone for joining us.